Well, welcome to CBN News Digital. I am managing editor Dan Andros. I'm here with Chuck Holton. We've got some breaking news here and some developing news. We've been waiting for this ground invasion, this expected ground invasion in Gaza to kick off from Israel. And Chuck, it looks like maybe not the full invasion's happening, but things are ramping up.
Well, that's right. They are definitely ramping up. As a matter of fact, we've been able to hear jet aircraft overhead here in Jerusalem. We haven't heard that in quite a few days. And there were even explosions. I'm only about 300 yards from the outside wall of the old city of Jerusalem. And just 20 minutes ago, heard a couple of explosions over in there. And earlier today, there was some gunfire in there as well from definitely an AK-47. So I'm not exactly sure what happened. We're still trying to figure out what's going on in the old city. But suffice it to say that the IDF themselves have announced that they are ramping up operations. And that comes on the heels of the operations that they've been doing over the last 48 hours. So night before last, they sent in a pretty large force, over 100 vehicles, and they carried out some missions. They had some targets picked out. They went out and hit those targets, and then they came back in and came back out of Gaza, Gaza only being 5 miles wide, right? Well, then last night, they went in again and did that a second time, hit a bunch of different targets, but this time they added an attack from the sea. So they did an amphibious operation. They released some footage of that. It looked pretty amazing. Lots of gunfire and explosions and stuff happening there. So they came in from the sea. They destroyed what they say was the Hamas version of the Navy SEALs base and then left again. Now tonight they're announcing this is just after the start of Shabbat here, and this would mark 3 weeks since the October 7th attacks that Hamas perpetrated on this country. It looks like they're going big tonight, and they have many more targets that they plan to hit inside Gaza.
Well, and, it's interesting, Chuck, as you mentioned earlier on your live stream, Chuck's been doing these lives every day, great updates on the ground there in Israel. If you haven't seen those, stay tuned. Usually around noon-ish Eastern time. Chuck's been providing updates for you all. They've been fantastic. But is this something that maybe people on the outside, we were sort of all expecting, 100,000 tanks to go rushing into Gaza and just annihilate everything? Are we still going to see that? Or is this maybe going to look different than we thought it was going to look, where they sort of increase it sort of gradually?
Well, I think it already looks different than we thought it would look because, like you say, everybody kind of had that image in their head of the, massive shock and awe campaign that was going to kick off as soon as, they were ready. And it looks like they've actually started more with, sort of dribs and drabs into Gaza, which actually I think is clever because Hamas has been preparing all this time in Gaza, but meanwhile Hezbollah and Iran and Syria and other bad actors like that have been saying that they will attack Israel as soon as Israel goes into Gaza. Well, they've sort of made it so that it's hard to tell, like, is this the real thing? Did they Was it just in and out, or like, you know, it sowed some confusion among their enemies, and that's exactly what you want to do in wars. You don't ever want to make it happen the way that they expect it to happen. So I really believe that just from the number of troops that I've seen massed along the border with Gaza over the last few days, that they are going to still do a major operation into Gaza with literally upwards of 100,000 troops or more. But at the same time, they're not sending them all in at once. It would be a logistical nightmare, first of all, to do that. Secondly, they're having to open roads. If you think about the bombing campaign that they've been doing over the last 3 weeks, they've flattened much of northern Gaza. And so it's all rubble now. Now, that was a smart thing to do, because with a built-up area, urban area, there are just lots and lots of places you can be shot from. And especially with high-rise buildings, that's deadly for tanks and armor and infantry. So they've reduced most of those buildings to rubble now, but a lot of that rubble is covering the streets that were there. So they have these absolutely massive, they're like D12 Cat bulldozers, if you know what that is. It's one of the biggest machines I've ever seen. It's the size of a house, and they're all completely covered up with cages on them to stop RPGs. They're armored, and I have no idea how much those things weigh, but it must be a lot. And you've seen on the footage from the past 2 nights, the first thing that goes in is one of those bulldozers, and it pushes through all of that rubble and creates a road that is safe for the rest of the armor to come in that can actually do damage. The tanks, the armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, things like that. So if you're a planner here, you've got to say, okay, first of all, we've got to figure out what are our objectives. What do we need to hit and destroy? And where are the possible hostage we could rescue? All that kind of stuff. But then you've got to decide who's going to do it, how they're going to be supported, how they're going to be rearmed and refitted, where they're going to rest, where they're going to sleep, all that kind of stuff. And if you send in 100,000 troops all at once, that just becomes untenable. So what we're talking about here is a more focused effort where they go in, they will maybe create a beachhead, so to speak, that will then expand into a larger invasion force.
You know, there's a lot of talk you've heard, and it kind of course, the numbers are always questionable, as George was mentioning earlier today on your guys' live stream, that, you know, how do you take the numbers from the Hamas health ministry seriously? We know there are definitely civilians dying, not denying that, but, you know, the numbers are so high, but they always put out like this generic number, like 1,000 civilians have been killed. They don't even say civilians, they say people. And my question to you is, how many of these Hamas fighters are there? What are they walking into when they do this ground invasion, right? Because, you know, I'm assuming that most of those people that died were probably Hamas fighters, you know, with some civilian casualties mixed in there. What is that number? Do we have any idea what that number is?
Well, no, I mean, they say they have 25,000 fighters, but you have to understand that Hamas is more of an ad hoc sort of organization in some sense. And what that means is, and just like we've seen with ISIS, when they start to lose, they start to shed people like rats jumping off a sinking ship. And so when Israel does go fully into Gaza and really commits a whole lot of force to this and gets very, very strong in their attacks, what you're going to see is a lot of guys taking off their whatever uniform they might have been wearing and saying, oh, no, I'm a civilian. It's very likely that some of the photographs we've seen out of Gaza of bodies of civilians were actually Hamas fighters, that after they were killed, their buddies took their armband or whatever it was that identified them off of them before they took their picture to make them look like civilians. You have to understand that everything coming out of Gaza is theater in some respect. Everything. Not just from Hamas, not just from the health department, the health ministry there, from the NGOs that are in there, from the media that's in there. everything that comes out of Gaza is in some sense theater. And that information warfare is the actual battle space that we're fighting in. The IDF has to learn to win in the information battle space, because if Hamas is able to turn the public sentiment against them, then it doesn't even matter how much they win on the ground. They've already lost. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely do. And don't forget, you can go ahead and, as you have been on all of Chuck's updates, go ahead and ask the questions. Just tag CBN News on there. We'll try to, any questions you have for Chuck, feel free to shoot them our way, because, this, again, we've been waiting for this. And if you're just joining the stream now, we're hearing word that Israel and the IDF are ramping up their operations inside of Gaza now. And you had mentioned, Chuck, this. I mean, they started this last night, I believe, was the first night where they, you're talking about the bulldozers and the amphibious operation. So they're starting to kick these things off right now. And what else are you seeing, Chuck? What are the things that are kind of hitting your radar right now?
Well, it actually was night before last when they first started this. Okay. And so last night they went bigger than they did the night before, not only in Gaza, but they also did operations in the West Bank, or in Judea and Samaria. And it was a major operation. It was probably 100 vehicles that rolled in there, and they did take fire. They did have a firefight. Okay. And so they apparently captured some people they wanted. They were able to eliminate some, resistance cells or something like that. One of the things they also did was they took one of those big bulldozers in there and they flattened a store that belonged to an Arab who had posted on social media mocking some of the women who were killed in the October 7 attacks. That just goes to show you that Israel is done playing. They're not messing around with this. If you're going to dishonor their dead, they're going to come after you and they're going to flatten your store. So they saw that happen. But what we're seeing now is just ramping up of the indirect fire going into Gaza, meaning artillery, rockets, and things like that. There's a lot of airstrikes happening. We're hearing the jets go overhead, and they are making, this is a combined arms operation, very complex, a lot of moving parts. And their idea is to get in there and to start to, there are probably lots of targets inside Gaza that they've figured out now that they just can't bomb. They're targets that are going to have to be taken out with boots on the ground. And not only that, but you can't hold ground from the air. So they can bomb it to powder, but as soon as the planes leave, the guys come out of the holes in the ground and out of those tunnels and start firing rockets again. So what they need to do is they need to absolutely, hold that ground in the north so that the Hamas fighters cannot come out of their tunnels. They have these sponge bombs that we learned about a couple days ago. And that's not SpongeBob SquarePants, sponge bombs. And they are essentially a gigantic can of great stuff. If you've ever worked with that foam sealant you get at Home Depot that you go around and try to seal up your windows or something, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing. It's a bomb like that they drop down in those tunnels, and it explodes, and it fills up the tunnel with that foam and completely seals it off, even airtight. And what that's going to do is it's going to make them unable, Hamas unable to use many of those tunnels because there's no airflow. See, without the ventilation, those tunnels are about worthless and deadly, really, down there. So this is something that they've obviously thought through, and this is something that when we interviewed Master Sergeant Haim, I forget his last name. He was in that special unit who has been training to go into those tunnels. He talked about there is some new and special technology that you're going to see used in the first days of this conflict. And this is one of those new and special technologies he talked about. So I think that we could safely say the war is on. Even if there was nothing going on in Gaza, I've been saying this for days now, if there was nothing going on in Gaza, they're still fighting in the north. They're trading shots back and forth across the border all day long up there now. And there has even been attacks that have come in from Syria that Israel has had to respond to from a Syrian perspective. So, I mean, it's on, folks, and it'll continue to ramp up. They'll continue to develop it. The statement from the IDF commander tonight said very clearly, we are going to take this slowly and methodically, and we are going to it's going to take a long time, but we're not going to go in like a flood and try to get it all over with in one night. We're going to take it slow so that we don't take a lot of casualties. And indeed, they have not. Thank heaven. The IDF in the last 2 nights on all of their missions, I think, has taken 1 wounded, and that was not in Gaza. So from what I understand, they've done pretty well at that so far.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. For those of you just joining, as Chuck said, they're ramping up the military operations, and as to quote Chuck, it looks like it's on. And you can keep asking questions. Tag them with CBN News in the comments. We'll try to flag some of them. I can get them over to Chuck. You know, Chuck, you were mentioning the tunnels here. This is obviously sort of the big thing with this particular invasion that you have to deal with. And you know what it reminds me of a little bit, as you were talking about, you bombard, and then they just still come out like, and it reminds me of World War II when on the Pacific theater, when they had to take some of these islands, and they would just bombard these islands from the ships. But then they had built all these tunnels into the hills. And so then they had to go in, like you said, boots on the ground. And, of course, this was the 1940s, and they didn't maybe have as sophisticated weapons, and they're using flamethrowers and just things like that, but very gruesome. But it's going to be, I would imagine, obviously different weapons, but it's going to be similar in its tenacity and personal nature.
No question. And you're right about that. History shows us that tunnel warfare, people in tunnels are very, very hard to get out of the tunnels. And the standard way of winning a battle like that is to seal the entrances of the tunnels and let those people rot inside there. And that's what they did in World War II. They did that a lot in Vietnam. And they likely will do that in some cases in this war as well. Now, when you talk about like Iwo Jima, for example, that's right. The ships bombarded Iwo Jima for days beforehand and really just pulverized the entire island to where there wasn't a tree, there wasn't a bush, there wasn't a blade of grass, nothing on that island. And when they were done and the troops came ashore, then Japanese came out of all these holes in the ground. They had, I went out and visited Iwo Jima a couple years ago, an amazing trip. But I think if I remember right, they had something like 11 miles of tunnels in a 2-mile long island. And they just hid out in those tunnels, and they were completely safe from that bombardment. There's only so much you can do with a bunker buster bomb. And I've been told that some of the tunnels in Gaza are more than 130 feet underground. Well, 130 feet underground, you're not going to bomb that thing. So somebody's either going to have to go in there and clean it out, or they're going to have to just seal it up and just leave it.
That dog in the background there, Chuck, clearly is not happy with the situation going on right now.
I'm trying to figure out where the dog is, actually. It's because there's somebody else walking their dog out here.
Yeah. Well, I
think he's in the car.
I'd criticize the dog owner, but my golden retriever absolutely barks her face off at everyone that walks by my house. So, but dog barking aside, Chuck, so the hostages, we keep hearing the number increase. What is the likelihood that there's any hope for these hostages right now?
Every day that goes by, their hope decreases. Rescuing a hostage is a very, very difficult and dangerous mission to undertake. We have specialized units in the United States that train specifically to do that. And I can tell you that those guys fire more than 1 million rounds every year in training in order to be good enough to rush into a room and shoot only the bad guys and not the good guys. Okay, that's Delta Force. I can also tell you that Delta Force is very likely in theater here, and has already had boots on the ground inside Gaza in the past 3 weeks. That is almost a foregone conclusion. We have something like, 25 American hostages that we know of so far? And so you're talking about American troops, both SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force, who are very likely already going in on missions. Now, you're not going to see a bunch of Marines going into Gaza. That's very, very unlikely. It's just not going to happen. Because number one, the IDF doesn't need them and doesn't want them. Number two, the Biden administration does not have the political capital to foist that on the American people. But everybody kind of understands that special forces are different, and they'll send special forces in, and anything that they accomplish will actually be credited to the IDF. So if you hear about hostages being rescued and the IDF rescued them, there's a fair to middling chance that they were rescued, at least in part, with American Special Operations Forces.
Yeah, it makes sense that they wouldn't be able to, tout that, but with American hostages likely still there, it makes a lot of sense. Not only would we help our partner, but in the international community, but also when our own citizens are there, it makes sense that we're going to assist in any way possible. I know Chuck has to go here in a few minutes. We're going to have continuing coverage, our Jerusalem team, with Chris Mitchell, who's right nearby in Jerusalem to where Chuck is right now. But they will be going live here in just a few minutes. Crutch, if you can get the link, if they have their live stream, the preview of their stream, if you can get that in the chat, that would be fantastic. So if we have that, we'll get that in there. But if not, just go over to the main YouTube page for CBN here and just wait, and it'll pop up live when Chris and his team go live. But they should be going live soon. So Chuck, I know you got to head out here in a minute. Any final thoughts that you want to leave us with before we hand it off to Chris and his team?
Well, I would be prepared for a long and drawn out process, but like I say, just remember that everything that you're hearing out of Gaza is theater. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not true, but it's going to be presented in a way that is intended to turn the attention and the support of the West away from Israel. And they do that very specifically. That is their main battleground right now, the information battle space. And whatever happens in the kinetic battle space on the ground is almost irrelevant at this point. It's what people believe about what's happening on the ground that's most important, because that support is vital to maintain an operation like this. Because if the political will is not there with the people, then the politicians are just not going to do it. And virtually every war that's been lost in my lifetime by the United States has been lost by the politicians, not by the soldiers. So, but the soldiers have got to have the support of the people to do that. And so this is where the battleground is taking place. It's up here in the virtual realm, and the stuff that happens on the ground is almost secondary to that.
All right. Hey, Chuck, one last question before you go. I don't know what you can or can't say, but I know you mentioned on one of the earlier live chats that you did that you were attempting to get at least closer to the front line or in bed with someone there, as this invasion kind of ramps up. Can you say anything on that front that's happening, or what can we expect?
No, I'll certainly be heading south probably as soon as it gets light in the morning. It looks now like I'll probably be up all night doing coverage like this here.
Yeah.
But as soon as it gets light, when it's midnight back in the States, I will drive as close as I can get. And we've been reaching out to people, making contacts. The IDF is unlikely to just let a bunch of journalists come in and ride along with them into the fight. There may be one or two special guys that get that privilege, but I doubt I'll be one of them. We don't know. It depends on how long this thing goes on. The IDF has got to, they definitely want the coverage from on the ground, but they want to very carefully vet those who are going in. And in reality, it's almost better to let the IDF soldiers and their combat cameramen film it, send it back out to the world, and then everybody gets the same stuff. But we'll see what happens. So yes, in the morning I'll be heading down to Ashkelon or somewhere close by down there.
All right. Well, we'll continue praying for you. Stay safe. Selfishly, I actually think that's better. I don't want you rolling around in a tank down there in the middle of all that.
I'd love to.
That's some close quarters combat right there. That is going to be some really, really tense stuff. So, all right, Chuck, I know you got to roll, but I appreciate you giving us this update.
All right, brother. Talk to you later.
All right, brother. Take care. And everyone watching, again, just head on over to the main CBN YouTube page and just kind of keep an eye out. Chris and his team, they will be starting up here in just a few minutes. Thanks so much for sticking with our continuing coverage here of the war in Israel. So God bless you. See you next time.